democratic socialism that Mr. Golding is talking about reintroducing to Jamaica. What exactly is Mr. Golding invoking? Mark Golding is deliberately invoking Michael Manley. From I born, every election in Jamaica, we have had to deal with Michael Manley. Respect to Manley. But I don't know why the PNP cannot move on from Manley. If the PNP is to win another election in Jamaica, they have to go up a hero circle, go wake up Michael Manley. Is what about Michael Manley that the PNP cannot let him go? There are many Jamaicans alive today. Don't know a thing about Manley, you know. Then they have to go resuscitate Manley. Mr. Dayton Campbell said that Mark Golding was Manley what? Reincarnated. Golding is deliberately invoking Michael Manley as an intellectual and political predecessor, not merely as a popular former prime minister. And Manley formally declared democratic socialism to be the PNP's government's ideological doctrine in 1974. That's before you were born, Harry. I guess maybe Caroline was a baby in 1974. Democratic socialism was the PNP's ideological doctrine. And the program of democratic socialism involved a sustainable, a substantially expanded role for the state, greater public ownership, redistribution, labor protections, land reform, education expansion, and greater Jamaican control over foreign-owned economic assets. That is what that ideology of 1974 represents. So when Golding says we need government that looks after the interests of the people, and when Golding talks about putting ordinary Jamaicans at the center of the economy, he's using essentially the same moral vocabulary that animated Manley. Is a forward Golding look. And I don't know how this has not brought about much more debate, but we're going to deal with it. The poor versus concentrated wealth. You hear what Patricia Duncan Sutherland said? 600,000 Jamaicans must get 1/8 of an acre of land. People versus powerful economic interests. Redistribution versus inequality. The intervention of the state versus laissez-faire. National sovereignty versus foreign economic influence. That is what the reference to Manley is about. And that is why it matters. Golding is effectively saying that the problem with Jamaica is not that we tried too much government intervention. The problem is that we did not finish the project. Mr. Golding wants to finish what Manley started. But the question is, what Manley started, can that be finished? What is going to be the result of finishing Manley's Mr. Perkins, Mutty Perkins would be turning in his grave, Edward Philip George Siaga. Boy, I tell you, Mr. Siaga will not be resting in peace if Mr. Siaga hear that in Jamaica today, we are talking about democratic socialism. What do you think the ideological fight where almost 800 Jamaicans lost their lives in that brutal election, what do you think it was about? It was about the different directions that Jamaica, the different paths that Jamaica was to take. And the United States got involved. The United States got involved, and that is why when you went to the shops, partly what? Because there's a story behind that. They were selling sanitary pads with sugar. The problem with Jamaica, according to Golding, is not that we try too much government intervention. The problem is that we did not finish the project. And that is the proposition that needs to be challenged. And this is where the argument has to be intellectually honest. And it was not that it is not that Manley was a failure in every aspect. That is not a historical truth. Not historically indefensible at all. Because the Manley government introduced and expanded policies that had lasting social consequences. The minimum wage, stronger labor protections, maternity leave, free secondary education, the adult literacy program, land reform, greater access to education, greater bargaining power for workers, increased Jamaican control over the bauxite industry. Those are historical records that are not defensible. And even serious academic evaluation of the Manley experiment acknowledged that there were some achievements, such as the whole matter of labor legislation, social inclusion. So the argument should not be Manley did no good. That would not be fair to history. The argument is this, that Manley demonstrated that a government can make important social reforms while simultaneously pursuing an economic strategy that destroys the resources necessary to sustain those reforms. Manley had good intentions, but good intentions alone don't build an economy. Manley demonstrated that a government can make important social reforms, but at the same time pursue an economic strategy that destroys the resources necessary to sustain those reforms. Because if you keep giving out without putting in, you eventually are going to end up broke. I think I should find the Honorable Prime Minister's budget presentation where the Prime Minister took us into the history. Give me a second. Let me see if I can find it. Okay. I think it is important that we go there. Is it this year? I think it is this year, 2026. I think so. Is it this year? All right. No. Well, let me not go there, because the audio is not as good as I would like it to be. The central contradiction is that what Manley was pursuing, he never had the plans to sustain it. The economy was collapsing. That is the central contradiction, because you can redistribute wealth. You can. But first, somebody have to produce the wealth. How men organize to produce the means of their subsistence constitutes the fundamentals of society. You can't produce, you can't redistribute while you're not producing. And let me tell you this, that the economic record of the Manley's administration is devastating. This is where the historical record becomes very difficult for the PNP. The PNP is romanticizing this, but it is not a very pleasant record. The 1970s record, very, very poor. Jamaica entered independence, you see, with very serious problems. At independence, there was large inequality. At independence, there was large unemployment. At independence, Jamaica was largely dependent on bauxite and foreign investment. The economy had also been experiencing remarkably strong growth in 1965. As a matter of fact, those periods of growth have not been seen in Jamaica again. I promised to do a podcast to tell you where Jamaica was in 1965. There is this view that we inherited an empty shell. It's not true. It's not true. I'm going to say something and I'm going to leave it there. A country spells disaster when the slave becomes the master. There are many Jamaicans who felt that had we remained with Britain, we would have been better today. And that may not sound like an argument that many of you want to embrace, but I want you to think about it. Had we remained with the United Kingdom, would Jamaica be better today? Think about it. This idea that Jamaica was an empty shell at independence, not true. The World Bank records real GDP growth in the 1960s of more than 6% annually. During 1952 to 1972 period. Between 1952, that is before Jamaica got independence, and 1972, that is almost 60 years ago, the Jamaican economy was growing at an average 6% annually. That is the World Bank. The International Monetary Fund records that gross domestic product, the GDP growth exceeded 5% annually between 1965 and 1970. So after independence, the Jamaican economy was growing by 5%. You tell me when, after independence, we have grown 5%. Tell me. And if that is so, what the dickens did we do with independence? You know, the real debate, the real debate, needs to start. Then came the 1970s. The IMF historical assessment says that real GDP fell by approximately 21% between 1974 and 1980. Every Jamaican should have stopped what they do right now and listen, because this is very important. The Jamaican economy was growing before independence and after independence. And after we got independence and introduced a man named Manley, GDP fell by 21%. There is more recent analysis, and it is even more striking. I'm going to get this and put up on a graph for you. GDP per capita fell by almost 30% between 1972 and 1980. Government expenditure rose from 23% of GDP in 1972 to 45% in 1978. Then just a spend money, so. And the fiscal deficit reached roughly 15% of GDP. You can't give and not put back in anything. And this is important. The IMF does not say external shocks were irrelevant, because there were enormous external shocks. We had the 1970 oil shock. We're kind of having, but not as in 1973. That is 52 years ago. We had the oil shock. We had the second oil shock after that. We had a global recession. There was a decline in bauxite prices, and there were deteriorating terms of trade. Okay, but the IMF explicitly concludes that the policy choices of Manley, the Manley government, PJ Patterson was a part of that too, played a significant role in the collapse of the economy. That distinction is crucial. And today, after Hurricane Melissa destroyed over 50% of the country's GDP, we have Mr. Golding talking about atrocity, that the government's recovery is atrocious. Oh my God, I tell you something. Sometimes I wonder why the Labour Party don't do better in pushing back against these things. We have Mr. Julian Robinson, who is the organic man, the man who said he would grow the economy organically by 3% so that he could pay 3.5. Mr. Robinson, you should go back and look at that debate performance of yours. Pure noise you wanna make. You think economic growth is a snap of your finger? I don't understand with the record of the PNP, how them so bold. How is the PNP so bold to speak about economic recovery and reform and give instructions? Pop. The intellectually serious conclusion isn't oil prices cause Manley's collapse, nor is it Manley alone cause everything. It is this. Jamaica was hit by external shocks, and the government response made the underlying economic problem sustainably worse. And that is the hard question for Golding to answer. How, Mr. Golding, are you going to fund an economy that is distributing and not growing? Because the current economy is virtually unable to give out anything more. We have to call it for what it is. The economy has suffered a shock, and it is barely recovering. The very PNP is saying that the economy is in recession. So you have to bring the economy out of recession, grow it, before you can even start thinking about redistributing. And this is where 5 flights a day becomes enormously important. Because that was a famous statement made. 5 flights a day to Miami. And it literally was a government's program to make Jamaica leave. The Jamaican government encouraged Jamaicans to fly out. 5 flights a day to Miami. It was Manley's rhetorical response to people who opposed his socialist direction. That was the prime minister who was telling Jamaicans that 5 flights were leaving a day to Miami. Go along if you want. Jamaica had no room for millionaires. Those who wanted to become millionaires had 5 flights a day to Miami. And some of them left, and they haven't returned. PNP bets on democratic socialism. Golding embraces Manley's 1970s philosophy, vows to build on the former prime minister's legacy. What was Manley's legacy? To chase Jamaicans out of Jamaica and run them to Miami. Those who dared to generate wealth, to build businesses. People literally, one man told me he bought a store downtown for $400. People ran away and left their cars, expensive cars, and their businesses. The International Monetary Fund, Finance and Development later discussed the remark through the experience of economists Peter Blair Henry. Blair Henry's family actually left Jamaica during this period. Mr. Henry's conclusion was particularly pointed. Peter Blair Henry is an economist. And Peter Blair said, you cannot help poor people by attacking conditions under which businesses and productive people operate. You cannot help poor people by attacking the rich. You hear that, Golding? Mommy Bear, you hear that? You cannot help the poor by attacking the conditions under which businesses and productive people operate. And the poor people of Jamaica need to understand that too. You have what is called trickle-down economics. Trickle down. If the man at the top do well, that man at the top employs people, pay taxes. Some of the poor people in Jamaica, you know. You know, things that rich people pay tax, but they do Because the little tax where you pay for your salary can't run the country. A lot of these hotels, they pay big money in taxes. Some of these big companies and corporations, Grace Kennedy, Geddes Grant, Lasco, they pay millions of dollars. The banks don't think that they don't pay taxes. Don't think that the little minimum wage worker pay tax to run country. Taxes come from the rich. The rich pay a lot of taxes. You want me to talk about the CIA? I can. You'll stay to hear it because you won't be happy. That is a very important philosophical phrase that you cannot help poor people by attacking the conditions under which business operate. And so 5 flights a day is really a metaphor for economic exit. Capital leave. Businesses leave. Entrepreneurs leave. And to think that is the same PNP came back with FinSac. Me no know, you know. Me no know. Me no know. This Jamaicans have a love affair with the PNP, and I can't figure it out. Somebody need to help me. Help me figure out why on God's earth. But I know it, I know it, but I won't tell you in this podcast or this broadcast. I know what it is. 400,000 people vote for the PNP in the last election. You gotta be kidding me. 5 flights a day means professionals can leave. Skilled workers galang. Businesses galang. And in an open island economy, the state cannot legislate those people into staying. The World Bank documented massive outflows of both capital and skilled labor during Jamaica's economic deterioration. My brothers and my sisters listening to me on this Saturday, we are where we are today because a lot of capital left the country during the 1970s. Skilled labor. Jamaica's economy deteriorated to the point where women could not get pads when they were having their periods. They introduced dirty girl soap. Stink when you wash with it. Couldn't even get soap for beard. And when you go to the shops, producer, do something for me, please. The Prime Minister gave a historical presentation in one of his budget presentation. Member Harry, if you're listening to me, find it for me. I don't know which one of the budget presentation, but the Prime Minister gave us a very, very pointed historical contextual piece in one of his budget presentation. It is at the opening. Can you help me with it, please? I beg you. Help me with it. And I have to find it and play. I just don't want to break from here and go look for it myself. Producer, help me with that, please. Let me know when you come up with it. Yes, Harry. That piece that the Prime Minister did in one of his budget presentation where he took us back to the FinSac era and the 70s. Help me with that. It specifically attributed, that's the World Bank, part of the decline to policies that damaged private sector confidence, reduced productive investment, and increased skilled migration. So the phrase represents something much deeper than an incentive. Comment. 5 flights a day means it's a symbolic economic mistake. Because what Manley did was treat people like capital. treated people like capital and productive people as enemies for social justice rather than resources that must be pursued to invest in Jamaica. And this is the philosophical rebuttal, therefore, to Golding needs to Golding. The PNP's argument tend to begin with a proposition that it is difficult to disagree with. Poor people deserve opportunity. Correct. We agree. Then government has a responsibility to protect people from exploitation. Correct. Then extreme concentration of wealth can distort democracy. That is also correct. But then comes the dangerous leap. We agree that poor people deserve opportunity. We agree that government has a responsibility to protect people from exploitation. And we also agree that extreme concentration of wealth can distort democracy. But then comes the dangerous leap. Therefore, the state should take a substantially greater role in directing economic activity. That does not logically follow. Here is the possibility, and here is where now the Jamaica Labour Party and the PNP are different. It is for the people of Jamaica to decide. You build a society in which markets produce wealth. While democratic government ensure that wealth is broadly shared. You have to build a society where the market produce the wealth and the government ensures that the wealth is broadly shared based on several principles. How men organize to produce the means of their subsistence constitutes the foundations of society. You train your people and you create opportunities so that the training they receive can be used to advance their lives. That is essentially the lesson of successful social democracies. That is why America, more than 250 years old, is a wealthy country. And this is where the Jamaican debate often becomes confused. You have countries like Denmark, Sweden, Norway. Yeah, they did not become successful by recreating 1970s Jamaica. What Mr. Golding talking about? We're going to go back to 1970s. You know, when people say, look at Scandinavia, they have socialism. But then you could look at Cuba. And when you look at Scandinavia, you know what they're looking at is something more complicated. Because the Scandinavian model combines private enterprise, competitive markets, extensive international trade. They have private ownership, high employment, strong labor institutions, high taxation, universal social services. You know, the OECD describes the Scandinavian Nordic model as involving universal health and social protection, education, and labor market supports, but also what is called tripartite cooperation between employers, union, and state, with the objective of getting people into productive employment. That's very different from the state should own the commanding heights of the economy. Their lesson is, let markets create wealth. Use democratic institutions to make the distribution of opportunity and social protection more equitable. That's social democracy, not the classic Manleyite economic experience. That distinction is absolutely crucial. And yes, thank you, Harry. And I don't think that the Manley model was anything close to social democracy. Don't think so at all. Mr. Golding goes on to say that democratic socialism is gaining traction in America. That is misleading, Mr. Golding. I wonder if I don't know, Mr. Golding. I don't know. I don't know if there are anyone listening from America that could confirm that democratic socialism is gaining traction in America. You know, Mr. Golding's argument about the United States deserves scrutiny. You know, there is clearly renewed interest in socialist and democratic socialist ideas in parts of America, especially on the left. You know, the current American policies, though, demonstrates that, you know, there is a view that the left has that the democratic ideas ought to come more to the fore. There have been recent developments, though, you know, involving democratic socialists of America affiliated candidates, and they show that the movement has gained political traction. Now, maybe that is what Mr. Golding is relying on, because as the economic squeeze hits the global markets, and Jamaica is no different, the recent ongoing war in Iran, the ongoing war in Ukraine has placed great strain on economies, and inflation is a tax on the poor. And when we have the global squeeze, small developing states like Jamaica bound to suffer. We see the prices at the pumps, we see the prices on the market, in the market, and on the shelves. And so politicians can exploit this for the vulnerable, because people will begin to feel that somehow the state can get involved and lower the price of flour. And already there are people in Jamaica talking that if Mr. Golding wins, patty, they're going to drop patty and chicken back and flour and rice. You see, this is where now the government will have to engage its people, massively engaged in public education campaign that gets people to understand that there are limits to what governments can really do. And also to show to people how its policies are impacting their lives without them even recognizing. Take, for example, the cost of bus fares in Jamaica. You drive from Spanish Town to Halfway Tree and you pay $100 in an air-conditioned bus. You think that is the cost of it? You minimum wage workers who think that, oh, well, we're only taking home $17,000 per week. But you ride on a bus and you only pay $100. And the man who drives his car from Spanish Town to Halfway Tree, it costs him $2,000 per day, while you only pay $200. And his gas is not subsidized. He has to bear the full cost of the trip, while yours is subsidized. Those of you who are sending off your children to school in September, do you do you realize how much the cost of your child's education is subsidized? There's a huge difference, you see, between some Americans are increasingly attracted to socialist idea and the United States has adopted democratic socialism. The United States has not adopted democratic socialism. It hasn't. The United States remains overwhelmingly a market economy based on private ownership, private investment, entrepreneurship, and competitive markets. So Goldin's argument is rhetorically clever, but it is logically weak. Mr. Goldin is appealing to contemporary popularity, not evidence that the economic model works. Mr. Goldin is trying to be popular, like Manley. Are more people talking about socialism? Yes. More people are talking about it. There's even a bigger problem because socialism does not solve the productivity problem. Member Harry, you can join me, please. And this is probably the most powerful argument for Jamaica. Jamaica's fundamental problem isn't simply the rich have too much.